Let's do it.
Benny, how are you? Thanks for coming on.
Do it. Awesome to meet you, John. I'm very excited.
Awesome to meet you too. So a couple of weeks ago, I was trying something new where I put out a Calendly link on Twitter because I've been having a lot of conversations with so-called plebs or just, random people out in the Twitterverse, random Bitcoiners. And I thought this might be a more efficient way of doing it, of just putting the link there and having people book themselves in, with some criteria, which I put in the note when you make the booking. And you, I think, are the third or fourth person to do it. So, thanks for booking yourself in. And you gave a little brief explainer about what you wanted to discuss today. But, obviously you're remaining anonymous. So I don't know how much intro to yourself you want to give, but to the extent you want to give one, go for it. And then let's rip into what you want to talk about.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. I think it makes sense to give a little bit of a background. I think the most important part is that about 8 years ago, I fell into the spirituality rabbit hole, partly out of deep inherent curiosity, but also because of the pain I was experiencing. I was suffering from anxiety and depression at that time. And luckily, I always had this feeling that this is not something I should fix with medication, even though it was offered to me directly, like even without listening to me properly from most of the professionals that I went to. But luckily, I saw it as kind of maybe a kind of a puzzle that I have to solve. And so what I did was basically 4 to 5 years of trying out all kinds of different therapies, lots of alternative healing modalities, lots of airy-fairy stuff, woo-woo stuff as well. And it took tons of coachings and all this kind of stuff. And probably
tried it all, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty happy about the creativity out there in the what kind of techniques are there still to explore. I'm really looking forward to go on exploring and exploring forever. But yeah, it took about, I'd say, 4 to 5 years to really find what actually worked for me, and that was kind of a miracle. After all this trying, I would have probably been at that point been labeled therapy resistant by the Fiat mental health system, and so at that point, I was studying music production. I was right in the middle of that. And I figured I still love music production, but I feel like what I've learned from going through these dark times, this is more my purpose to go out there and help people with what I've learned with my journey. And so I got a training in IFS, internal family systems therapy. Have you heard of that?
No.
It's actually pretty amazing looking backwards. I got to know it before I got to know Bitcoin. And this model sees the healthy human psyche as a decentralized system. And so that was a perfect primer to later then understand Bitcoin really fast once I got in touch with it. And it was kind of a perfect storm of many primers before getting in touch with Bitcoin that helped me like pre-frame myself towards understanding it. Because in addition to the, let's say, emotional rabbit hole, I also went down the entrepreneurship, online business rabbit hole. There's a universe out there on that, and I learned so much about the marketing, market research, developing like the main phrase of every business mentor that I learned from is create value. And your podcast is a lot about value as well, as is Bitcoin, and so this value topic was always present, and lots of stuff like money mindset, and there were bits and pieces like all throughout that universe that that all were like small puzzle pieces of understanding the greater systems. However, none in that space, no one has really given me the answers, because I was looking for bigger picture understanding all the time anyway. And so finally, out of accident, I stumbled upon a Joe Rogan podcast episode with Peter Schiff. and he pretty much perfectly explained everything that's wrong with the Fiat system to me, and I was mind blown. I was like, okay, this is kind of I have to follow this trail. Listen to another episode, some other podcast where Peter Schiff was guest, and he was asked about Bitcoin, and he said, no, it's a scam. It doesn't have any intrinsic value. Forget about that. And I was like, I'm curious about that stuff. So I just typed in Bitcoin has no intrinsic value into my podcast app. And what I found was Guy Swan, Bitcoin Audible, Bitcoin has no intrinsic value, ... And that is great. And I clicked on that episode, listened to it, and it just took that episode.
Was that a Connor Brown article?
Oh, I don't know exactly. Maybe.
I think it might have been, but anyways, sorry, go on.
Yes. And it just took that episode to orange pill me. It was just, okay, that's it. Everything makes sense now. Of course, I like, because all the pre-framing before that. So the perfect mix of understanding the collective psyche and understanding business, markets, and also the emotional relationship to money was also a lot of a big topic that I studied the years before. And so, yeah, basically, since I got that orange pilling moment delivered by Guy Swan, it's about 2 years ago now, and ever since then, the main question that I obsessed over was, how can I help accelerate the Bitcoin adoption with what I know from my experience with emotional healing processes or emotional development processes. And I've also tried the regular way, as we all do, trying to force feed the orange pill to everyone around me. Obviously, met a lot of resistance. Then went the other way that most of us go after a while, saying, okay, you know what, I'll let it go. I'll let people come to me when they are ready. But even though that felt way more mature, there was still this energy inside of me that was like, I want to do something. There's got to be something that I can do. And creating Bitcoin content was for me like, there's so much out there that's awesome already, and it's more like creating and putting it out is still not this directive, this outreaching energy. It's more like, here we are, come to me. It's still this pull energy. It's not this push energy that wanted to get out of me. And so basically didn't really find any alternative though. But during the work that I did with my clients in that time, I realized, wait, waking up to Bitcoin is pretty much the same, or has at least most things in parallel, as healing attachment trauma, as healing developmental or relational trauma, which is all about realizing where your boundaries are, where your sovereignty starts.
Mm-hmm.
And
I feel like
yes,
you're about to, break into that thing. So just before we do,
yes,
and obviously, if you don't want to share anything, just let me know. Although you are anonymous, so perhaps there's less of a resistance to it. But like way back when you started on that journey of basically the the standard medical system being inadequate in terms of helping you to resolve the issues you were having, and then going down the route of trying all these different alternatives. What was it that was causing you, the distress, the despair, the depression? Like what, because I ask because I know a lot of, I've had enough of these conversations to know that a lot of people share similar things, the thing that causes despair, whether it be trauma, whether it be hopelessness, whether it be nihilism, whether it be inadequacy, fear, all that kind of stuff. I mean, these are very common things that a lot of people share. And so just to maybe properly contextualize the solution's not the right word, but the approach that you're going to, I presume, soon articulate and put forward, I think it might enrich it to know kind of the emotional state that ultimately comes from. So can you put any more details on, what it was that caused you to seek help in the first place?
Yeah. So if I would have to put the cause of all of the pain into one word, it would be Fiat. I didn't know that at that time.
Fiat.
But Fiat, yes. It's the root of
the system, you mean?
Yes,
like all the different perversions that the Fiat system conjures up, where you felt the burden of it all, and you were distressed by it all, and that was just eating away at you, sort of thing. Is that a proper characterization?
Yeah, not only seeing the suffering around me and kind of being confronted with all that despair all the time. That's a big part. But the way that this especially affected my parents and all caregivers that were around me when I was a child, the main mechanic, or the main dynamic that causes attachment trauma, which basically just means, as a kid, I don't feel safe because my caregivers can't provide for me physically and emotionally. For most people, it's emotionally, but that's highly related to the physical caregiving as well. Poverty causes emotional lack of resources,
distress, stress, anxiety, and that filters down to
exactly, and no time resource, and all the propaganda, all the it's a debt system. So the main emotion that is governing us is guilt. And newborns are picking that up. Newborns don't feel safe when they're around heavily guilty people, or people that are feeling like they're guilty.
What type of guilt do you think they're feeling? Like guilt from what, or caused by what?
I would say it's the tricky thing about this is that it's so vague that you can't put a finger on it. It's so vague. It's so subtle. It's all this subtle gaslighting, this subtle the Malthusian view, this view of sin as well, like all these systems that are just combined still in our collective consciousness from hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, of being governed, being enslaved, and it's so subtle, like that's why nobody notices it going through the matrix. Like we, after quote unquote waking up to Bitcoin and seeing all these subtle patterns, we're like, holy cow, this is like all this double speak, all this, it's so hard to put a finger on. And that is the tricky thing about attachment trauma, is that you don't have to have any shock trauma in your childhood. You don't have to have any like accidents or abuse, like physical abuse, whatever form of abuse, and you don't have to have any of that. And that's why it's so hard to find the solution, to finally understand what the hell is wrong with, quote unquote, wrong with me. So it's this feeling of inadequacy that makes the nervous system of parents, of caregivers, just very unstable.
Right.
And if you as a child have the need for feeling safe, and someone who is not feeling safe themselves is coming to you, or maybe coming a bit late to you because they are busy watching the news, or busy watching some guilt propaganda about the Nazis, that is often formulated very subtly in a way that you feel guilty yourself for what happened back then. And if caregivers consume stuff like that, it's just a child just feels the world is unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
And if the world is unsafe, it's in constant danger. And that is basically the root cause of all the anxiety disorder that is ramping up in nowadays.
One of the ways that I've characterized it in the past, and this was definitely part of my, I guess, struggle, in my earlier years. And, there's always a way forward, and you always have to take responsibility, So in all these conversations, I never want to suggest or insinuate that it's the fault of something outside of us. Ultimately, the buck stops with each of us. But of course, you can't be oblivious to the manner and ways in which the system that you're embedded in is either, supporting of you, or at least creating a fair landscape for you to exist in, a fair and free landscape, let's say, or the ways in which it's depriving you or exacting an artificial sort of deprivation upon you, or stressors or anxieties and all those sorts of things, which that's the fiat answer, right? That is what the fiat system does. And for me, perhaps the tension, like a broad tension, not getting down into specifics, was always, you grow up, and even though the world is, for lack of a better term, fucked up, there's so many bright spots, right? Beautiful moments, friendships, love, like we get exposed to those things, and they resonate with those elements within us, right? And we can find them within ourselves. And, especially the innocence of childhood, like these things are on full display, and you're feeling them a lot, even if you can't really understand them or intellectualize them or articulate them yet. But in reflecting back, I think one of the things for me was, you grow up and you get an impression for what goodness is. And then you look out on the world, and there's a mismatch or a tension, or like you see, like, how come the world isn't rewarding those things? How come the world isn't amplifying those things? How come those things aren't the top achievements in this world, or the things that are most amplified or incentivized or elevated? Like, why is that? Again, for lack of a better term, why does the world seem so fucked up? Why does what seems good to me and in me doesn't seem to be reflected out in the world, at least not as much as it could be? And that that causes those feelings of like that, like you don't belong, or like something is wrong with you, because like, well, can't be wrong with the world, right? The world is real, and you're the one that's needs to conform yourself to it. That's what the tension is. You're not getting it as much. But I think many of us, just the reason why we go through that journey of discovery perhaps is like, no, like you're so convicted in the sense, it's not me, like, of course I'm not always right. I have my biases. I'm subject to conditioning and all that kind of stuff, but there is something wrong. Or at the very minimum, there's something that can be improved. And, I'm going to hold on to that flame that causes me to feel that way. And if that means that I have to bear the burden of tension for longer, one of the things I always repeated in my head when I confronted, the difficulty of that tension was, I'd rather be tormented by the truth than coddled by ignorance, because I think that's kind of that's the fork in the road. You can say, well, the world is not really matching what I think it's supposed to, or it's I'm seeing a lot of ugliness in the world. Well, you can just turn the blinders off, accept it, ignore it, and just find a little track and be blissfully ignorant. Or you can maintain a reverence for the truth and a recognition of its redemptive capacity. You say, no, like the truth is the most important thing, and I don't want to take my eye off that, because that is ultimately what's going to redeem myself, and to the extent that I can participate in its flourishing in the world, then the world as well. And that's the more difficult road, because it's not the road of mindless consumption and TV and like all the fiat stuff that we would, or all the attributes of a fiat world that we would identify. That's what the
Mm-hmm.
ignorant road is. Just dumb down, don't think about it, consume, then die, and that's it. And
Mm-hmm.
the more truthful path is the one where you constantly seek to see with greater clarity, to engage in the uncomfortable processes of finding your blind spots and finding your biases and prejudices and conditioning, and trying
Mm-hmm.
to resolve them, trying to have them cohere more to something that's more truthful, and maintaining that out in the world, even when it's not incentivized, it's not elevated, you're not rewarded
Mm-hmm.
for it immediately. Now you may be rewarded for it on a kind of metaphysical scale, but that is oftentimes that's not so much comfort in your daily life, because your daily life is far more those interactions with the
Mm-hmm.
real world. And one of the things that makes me, well, this is kind of the lead into what I think we'll be discussing, but
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that psychedelics have always been a big part of, or not
Mm-hmm.
always, but for 15 or 20 years, they've helped me in that process amongst many other things. But it's always been the case. It's like, wow, you can pierce the veil a bit, you can see greater truth, you can even, bring it down into your own life and have it, use it as a tool for your own refinement towards that truth. But you still don't really have a mechanism for fixing everything outside of yourself. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this is the cause why a lot of those, a lot of people that go down that route end up kind of just exiting. They find an enclave like Bali or Chiang Mai or,
Mm-hmm.
Tulum or wherever all the hippies are hanging out, the people that like
Mm-hmm.
reject the system. And again, I mean, those can be lovely environments and lovely
Mm-hmm.
people, of course, but it's giving up almost in a sense. It's not addressing the problem, the actual problem. And when Bitcoin came along and the penny finally
Mm-hmm.
dropped for me and I got it, I was like, this is exactly, I mean, this is it. This is basically the
Yes.
transmutation of those same principles, but into the interpersonal world that can actually
Mm-hmm.
rectify the problems that Fiat has created, and also all the lesser aspects of ourselves, the less virtuous components of who we are, which have amplified those things, can now do the exact opposite and dial down those things and amplify the virtuous aspects of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so ever since then, it's been a process of leaning into that, because it's not only another excellent tool for your own refinement, and a lot of people find this, it's like when you learn about and engage with Bitcoin, like it's like a personal development or even a spiritual sort of tool where you just kind of your attempt to understand this thing, to understand this idea, just not only invigorates you intellectually, because it forces you to kind of broaden your scope of intellectual pursuit in order to try to contextualize and understand the full implications of this thing. But
Mm-hmm.
even that alone is a very powerful instigator for your development in other ways, whether it be emotional
Mm-hmm.
or in relationships or spiritual or what have you. And of course, the process of trying to fully understand Bitcoin can lead you down into some pretty, well, some interesting rabbit holes itself that lead, to
Mm-hmm.
the door of some of the biggest questions that philosophy and theology have always tried to answer. But suffice it to say that, I think, or for me, it was recognizing that disparity between what I thought was right and true and good and what I was
Mm-hmm.
seeing out in the world. And when I came across Bitcoin, it seemed like that is the most that would be the most powerful tool to close the gap and rectify
Yes.
that big gargantuan problem that I was
Yes.
perceiving, that prior I couldn't even imagine could be rectified.
Yes, exactly. I see it. So there's a model of evolutionary psychology stages, spiral dynamics. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it, but I haven't gone into it.
The funny thing is that this was developed before Bitcoin, and they describe exactly the process, the birthing process that we're going through now. And the two stages before the leap that we are going through now, basically the two stages that are before the Bitcoin stage, are the entrepreneurial stage and the hippie stage. And the entrepreneurs reject the hippies for being woo-woo, and the hippies reject the entrepreneurs for being so aggressive, so straightforward, so capitalistic, and so egotistical. And once you integrate both of these aspects in yourself, once you see in yourself that you as a human, you have both of these sides, you kind of you combine the spiritual and the material, and then you understand Bitcoin. Kind of like this is a very rough description of it, but so the gap that you're seeing is basically, I would say, as well, the gap between the spiritual and the material world that is closed by Bitcoin.
Well, that's I agree, and have had similar thoughts before, but of course, it's quite the statement. Would you like to put some more meat on that one?
Yeah. So for example, for the entrepreneurs, for the more materialistic stage, that is before the should I go into the other stages as well, that
yeah,
in this model?
However you like, you know. Whatever.
Okay. So the main birthing process that we are in with the collective psyche right now is that the first stage that realizes that there are stages is the first one that will actually mediate and integrate all the stages that came before to work together. So we have to, so if we want peace and harmony on this world, and want the cooperation, the deflationary system that Bitcoin also brings, if we want to grow the pie of value, we have to find all the aspects in ourselves that we grew through, and have to integrate those aspects that we have rejected. So for example, the hippies, they reject anger, they reject aggression, they don't see the good thing in aggression, they don't realize that, for example, self-defense is a very virtuous, can be a very virtuous skill or attribute. And I think that Bitcoin helps the quote-unquote hippies, or the spiritual people, to realize, okay, there's this thing that is supposed to bring all these values that we have into the world. Let's look at it a bit. Let's look at it a bit closer, because someone who understands my values is telling me about it. Let's look a little bit closer into it. Oh, it has to do with money. How can that be? And then they they see, oh, it has to do with setting boundaries. It has to do with standing your ground. It has to do with becoming self-sovereign. Well, I like freedom. I'm looking for freedom of my soul all the time. This aligns completely with my value. And oh wow, there's this thing, Bitcoin, that bridges the gap to understanding the value of boundaries, the value of aggression, the value of action. And the entrepreneurs, they have the value of creating, of taking action, of change, of building something in the world, of being of taking self-responsibility. And once they see that there's a tool for that, that aligns their values, which is Bitcoin, they start to they can look deeper into it and realize, oh, there's even more to it. It also fixes the world. Oh wow, it also brings all these woo-woo values, but in kind of a grounded way. We like that. So it kind of bridges the gap between the between these worlds. Does that explain it deeper?
Yeah. That's, you mean the if we characterize those two worlds being kind of engaged in or represented by, you know, the so-called hippie approach versus the so-called entrepreneur approach. Like both of those factions are appealing to those worlds, you would say, a bit more. And in this case, we're using the term worlds to mean like, you know, a manner, what aspect of reality you focus on, basically, or you engage in the most. And those two kind of being archetypes for different, engaging different aspects of reality. And Bitcoin basically having the values or virtues, and also being an instrument or tool that enables engagement on both of those aspects, and as a result brings them together.
Exactly. Yeah, the stage that we are moving towards, that I would say Bitcoiners like we are at, is the stage above the hippie stage, the first stage that is aware that there are other stages, and that is able to see see complex systems, and that sees the good, sees the bad and the good in all developmental stages. Before that, even in the stages of imperial of empires, of religions. So I listened to your episode with Bitcoin Consciousness, where you were also talking about the values that religion probably gave humanity for that time, because it was the most viable option at that time. And this is exactly it. It's like looking back and integrating and seeing what valuable stuff can we learn from these prior development stages, and how can we integrate them all together in a fully functioning system. And this stage basically is the systems thinking stage yellow. That's how it's called. And this is basically the birthing process, moving all the other stages further and further up the spiral into that stage, so we can all work together.
What's in spiral dynamics? What is at the top of the spiral? Let's say
infinity.
Infinity of what is the spiral? A characterization of consciousness, like different levels or
yes
experiences of consciousness?
It's starting from quote unquote lower stages of consciousness and spirals up. It always swings from me focused to we focused. And the further you go up the spiral, the more we and me work together, and the more it becomes one. And we cannot know where the spiral will end, because probably it won't, because everything
goes on.
Everything goes on, and there are more and more stages. Cyclical. Probably, yes. Maybe it collapses in itself at one point and starts over from the bottom again. And there are more and more stages uncovered throughout the years as well.
But the idea is kind of like the pinnacle of the spiral is like akin to enlightenment, that notion.
Yeah. And probably enlightenment is infinite as well.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, it's
infinite stages of infinite stages.
Yeah, and any metaphysical or philosophical system of understanding has to kind of converge on an apex of the system, right? And then, it's kind of like, well, what's at the apex? It's like, well, who knows? Things restart, or you enter into another level or whatever. But it's the same as whether it's Hinduism or Buddhism or Christ or Neoplatonic, and the one, like things converge into a oneness. That seems to be the if not the final ending, I mean the conceptual ending point of any system of development seems to be the case.
Yeah, I like to focus more on the journey. Except,
sure.
I mean, both is important, but what I find really fascinating is to realize, oh wow, we're actually pretty close to the stages that actually enable harmony, more and more harmony in the world. I mean, in the physical, we see it with Bitcoin, but just observing the psychological attributes of different groups of people around the world, how they are distributed, how they are, what the percentages are, we can see that we are still, most people are in the imperial stage, which is one stage below the entrepreneur stage. It's the stage of following orders. But the pain of staying in that stage becomes greater and greater, and the stages above, which are the entrepreneurial and spiritual stage, are growing. They are pretty. Those are pretty substantial amounts of people that are just pretty much just waiting to be orange, quote unquote orange pilled, even though not consciously.
Yeah. All right. Before we go back to what you were going to break into in terms of the specific approach to resolving trauma and its relation to Bitcoin, and we will do that next, but just to finish off this portion or this part of the conversation, you mentioned that you the orange pill hit you 2 years ago after, the Guy Swan article, and then going down the rabbit hole after that. How much has, because all this stuff we're talking about, like we're finding these different methods to resolve these different things within ourselves, and that's kind of the spiritual or personal development journey. And then to me, and then this is kind of what I was alluding to before, you have this thing in Bitcoin that synthesizes all of that perfectly. And not only is that, tremendously uplifting, energizing, hope spring, renewed hope and all that kind of stuff. But it's also like what it delivers in terms of, kind of coherence within your consciousness, about your capacity to develop a perspective that's perhaps more clear, like, gain greater access to clarity and see truthfulness more easily. And then of course, the result of that is being able to orient your life around it more, and and presumably, if, being able to construct and orient a life that's better, that's more beneficial, that's more aligned with the things and the virtues and the principles and the ethics that you deem to be the ones that are most valid. And, that is obviously incredibly, to the extent that it's true, to the extent that that's actually happening, is incredibly enriching experience, or incredibly enriching. It enriches one's life tremendously, let's say. And so I'm just curious, over the last 2 years, has that been the case for you? And, if so, any other, details that you would add to that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I won't go into the details of nutrition, but that's one area of life that definitely got some changes. I was vegan for 3 years before getting orange pilled. No, I'm not.
Let me guess, you eat more meat now.
Yeah, a little bit. And that definitely made a huge impact on my energy throughout the day. And but the thing that I think is actually the biggest value for my personal life is a growth in confidence.
Right.
Because, like I say this all the time when I'm talking to friends that are like, oh, I'm trying to, like, why am I always so insecure when I go out and talk to people? And I'm like, well, you're trying to fit into something that's not human nature. And the more you understand human nature, and Bitcoin is a huge part of that. Of course, like there's the saying of, I think it was Jiddu Krishnamurti. It's not an accomplishment
of health to be well adjusted to a sick society.
Exactly that. And of course, one can read those sentences, one can read those quotes and understand it to some degree. but Bitcoin is kind of the looking glass. Is it called looking glass? With the stuff which you zoom into things. Magnifying glass, exactly. The magnifying glass. Bitcoin is the magnifying glass which you can hold onto every area of your life and really understand, like everything, every puzzle piece falls into place, and you see all the details, all the nuances, why everything is as effed up as it is. And not only do you see what's effed up, but you also can always directly think, okay, what would Bitcoin do? Kind of.
Exactly.
And this way you not just see what's wrong, but you also directly see how it would be in the world that's actually human, in the world of dignity. And seeing that is just, it's like going around and people are telling me, it's bad to breathe air, and trees are made out of plastic. And I'm like, no, they aren't. It's like pretty much everything people who don't know that paradigm are telling me that it's not true is like, no. I can confidently say, no, you are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even have to be righteous about it.
Right.
That's one maybe a topic we can go later into as well. The difference between being right and righteous. Because it's okay, sure, let's go. so what I figured, that as a Bitcoiner, yes, and the more you understand, the more you use that magnifying glass, and the more you understand how a human world would actually look like, or how a healthy world would actually look like, you kind of develop some strong opinions, strongly held, to say it like that. And the tricky thing about it is, the strong opinions, strongly held, are probably true, even though you're doing it in an unhealthy way of holding them so strong and opposing, force feeding them others. But I think it was Jordan Peterson who, in one, I don't know what interview or talk it was, but he said the best way to, what was it, to help someone admit that they are wrong is to build them a golden bridge that they can walk backwards on. Something along those lines. So in terms of not,
so it's easy for them to adopt another perspective, let's say.
Yeah,
forcing it on them,
so they don't feel shamed for being wrong.
Right.
And what I noticed when in the times that I went into it, like, no, it's Fiat wrong, and kind of trying to convince people like that, it always had this energy of, once they would admit it, I would say, I told you so, ha. Mm-hmm. And even though that wasn't like consciously, this is the goal of everything that I do, or it was still kind of a pattern that was laying below that. And I feel like many people, I think that's the closest, or the most exact definition of the toxicity of the Bitcoin maximalists, I would say. That's the closest I can get to it in defining it, is this being righteous, making the other person, giving them the impression that if they would admit they are wrong, they would get a big "I told you so" ha. So one very important, yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
So staying humble and stacking sets, to me, is like yin and yang. The stacking sets is the rational part. It's the yang, and the staying humble.
It's the greedy part, almost, in a sense. Wherein staying humble is
yeah,
kind of the antithesis.
Yeah. yeah, it's a healthy form of greed, the stacking
Right.
sets. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And the staying humble, I think we as a community, we as a Bitcoin community, we can focus more on the staying humble part, and not necessarily in the keep calm people, like don't raise your voices, don't stand your ground. Definitely, I don't mean that, but more in a humbleness is just a quality that you can use and develop to better connect with people, to build deeper relationships. And it doesn't mean like holding back your opinion at all. It doesn't have to mean that. And I think staying humble and stacking sets is just a multi-dimensional
very much
truth.
so. There's infinite interpretations of that wisdom, and it is wisdom, kudos to Odell for putting that together, because that'll be a timeless piece of wisdom for a long time to come, I think. But when I hear you saying all that, I agree, and I think the reason for, because you're kind of saying like, well, now I can think I'm seeing truth, I think I can be right, but I don't have that impulse to convince people that I am, and then let them know that I was. And I think, again, we're back to that distinction of Bitcoin and fiat. In fiat land, the whole point is the system is predicated on having power over to coerce or force other people to do what you think is right. And so like in that system, of course, that would be the response to being right. Like not only can you be right, but you have to impose it on other people. You have to get people to acquiesce or submit to your rightness. Whereas in Bitcoin, we know that I can't make you adopt Bitcoin in at all. Like, so I could be right about a great many, about Bitcoin and all the different elements of it, but there's no point in me trying to like that being adversarial when I'm doing that with you, because I know that the solution to, the broader solution to the problems that we're discussing or we're facing is not me forcing anything on you. It's you making a decision to adopt something for yourself. And so in that context, like I just think that changes the energy or the attitude towards, discussions about, what is right or wrong in a given context. With a fiat mindset, the right or wrong, there's something that follows right or wrong, and it's one kind of imposing something on the other. Like you have a political discussion, what's right or wrong? Oh, this side won, that means this is getting imposed on everybody. In Bitcoin, it's the opposite. It's like you can still have the right or wrong, but it's almost exclusively for the benefit of the refinement of your own perspective. It doesn't mean or doesn't necessitate imposition of anything on anyone as a result of one side being right versus the other. And that seems to be the case, with Bitcoin, with what's happening with Bitcoin.
I love that perspective.
Mentality is being adopted, and to the point about toxicity, because you might say, well, that somewhat contradicts it, and I would say, I don't think, you're always going to have outliers, right? And we're all imperfect. And so occasionally people are going to get emotionally triggered, and they're going to say things that, maybe they otherwise wouldn't, or whatever, like nobody is perfect. And so when you throw everyone together in an environment like Twitter, let's say, you're going to get all sorts of different ways of people expressing themselves. But I think even those people would admit, like, they're not trying to force anything on anyone, but because they can't, they know they can't, like I can't, even if I wanted to, I can't make you adopt Bitcoin, and therefore I can't force you to participate in what I believe to be the most powerful solution available. So that just exits consciousness in a way, like as an idea. But I think what is happening with the toxicity to a certain degree, and of course there's probably multiple variables here, but I do think an ethic is emerging in the culture, right? In people who value Bitcoin and who discuss it and who are using it and integrating into their lives. And I think those people that kind of are on the front lines of the toxicity thing, and again, accepting the individual idiosyncrasies that cause people to express themselves in a variety of ways. But I think it's basically giving voice to the ethic that's emerging through the attributes of Bitcoin, which probably not incidentally are the same virtues and values and ethics that we might deem to be most fundamental, and which we could probably find representations in the religions and theologies and philosophies, throughout all of human civilization. But it's those ethics being given voice by those people, and they're basically just saying, that's not right, or that's not true. They're basically countervailing the violation of certain virtues, which is why, like, from my perspective, my observation, when I see toxicity in the space, usually it's a response to people being dishonest, disingenuous, scammers, ignorant to a fault, like those sorts of things. So it's not that they're trying to impose anything. It's almost like they're just I mean, in a sense, and I've always seen it this way, I think it's a service, because you don't have to listen to anyone who's yelling at you, but it is feedback and data that you might consider and say, oh, like, do I have a blind spot here? And am I being like more dishonest than I ought to be? Am I being faker than I ought to be? Am I being more arrogant or hubristic, or narcissistic than I ought to be? Well, maybe, maybe I don't like the delivery method of someone calling me a piece of shit scammer, but maybe I should have a look and see if there's any validity to it. And that's where the humility part comes in, right? Because if you can come in to the space of many people have, with different backgrounds, different levels of wealth, all that kind of stuff. And even if you don't directly experience it, but even if you just witness it and you're like, oh, how dare people speak like this? This is just horrible. I'm out. This is not a community I want to be a part of. But if you can tolerate, if you can look at it and see it for what it is, and be humble enough to, to allow that kind of self reflective analysis to happen, and to be open that maybe there's something here that you're not seeing, and to allow for all these different forms of expression and still keep going despite all that. Well, that seems to be why, how this phenomenon or this technology is self-selecting for humility. Because all those people that would be turned away at the door because they're not humble enough to see past something they don't like, someone speaking to them in a way that they're not accustomed to or whatever, then they get turned around immediately. But people that don't get turned around by that, well, they get to go further and further and further and further down the rabbit hole, to what I presume to be their great benefit, because then they begin to understand what this is, and obviously they're in a better position to welcome the benefits of it into their own life as a result.
Yeah, I would agree with pretty much all you said. However, I think there's a nuance. I think most Bitcoiners, probably 99%, don't consciously want to be righteous. However, I feel like there is, because it's ingrained in us, because we grew up in a fiat world, we grew up in a righteous world, in a world of where being righteous is the standard. I think there are still some of these. It's kind of a passive aggressiveness in that, and I think Bitcoin is showing these emotional refinements, these karmic refinements that one could still take, to say it like this, to be even, because sure, we definitely want to select. We don't want people who are arrogant or scammers in the field of Bitcoin, but it's not happening. It's not possible anyway to have a scamming, like, you can't be a Bitcoiner and a scammer at the same time. Like, if you're adhering to the principles. So
right.
So what I think is that we as Bitcoiners, if we want to let's say spread or help more people just to understand it, and help more people to see the value of Bitcoin, we can be even more humble than we already are. And I think it's a great, this mechanism of calling scammers out, amazing. I love it. It's this is what the world needs: skin in the game, social skin in the game. However, for those people that we want to, I mean, even for the scammers, if we build loving human relationships to those people,
you can turn them around.
Yes, and of course, this might even sound like, oh, like I'm in a relationship and I can change her. She will turn around. However, I actually think that, sure, we don't have to bite out our teeth on the hard cases, but we can start going reaching our hand even further, being even more open, going one step further towards them, being even more open, being even more loving. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's this huge potential, because we Bitcoiners, we are, oh my God, the Bitcoiners I know are the most loving people I know. and we can, I think we can show that, and we can act on that even more. I think this is the could be one of the most potential marketing attributes of being or let's say one of the most effective branding aspects of being a Bitcoiner is being seen as, oh, these Bitcoiners, they're loving, and not loving in a nice guy kind of way, but in an authentic way. And I feel like there's this tiny sliver of subconsciously trying to convince the others of this subconscious righteousness that one could that we Bitcoiners can even transcend further. So Bitcoin gives us more humbleness, and the others more humbleness.
Yeah, well, again,
the Bitcoiners.
It's part of the many dimensions of that statement, stay humble, because it very much is like, well, if you're trying to impose things on others, even what you to believe to be righteous, well, is that not kind of a manifestation of your ego, insofar as it's saying, oh, like I have the right to impose something on someone outside of myself, and the answer is probably yes there. And you could use it the other way too. It's like you could say that this social aspect of Bitcoin is part of its immune system in trying to keep the people that are coming into it humble, so there's always like a fractal pattern within pattern sort of dynamic happening. And I agree with what you're saying. I often have thought about it in terms of like this whole notion of spooks in Bitcoin, like people from 3-letter agencies, or people that have nefarious aspirations, hanging around in Bitcoin, and I don't know what they do. They try to influence people or undermine Bitcoin in some way. And I always thought, well, first of all, how could you ever possibly know? Like, if they're good at their job, you're not going to know. But more importantly, I thought, like, is there any benefit, to being so hyper vigilant to the point of paranoia and thinking everyone is spook and that kind of stuff? And by the way, I'm not saying that like you should make yourself impervious in terms of you and your Bitcoin and as independent and sovereign as possible. But what you said about all this made me think of it. And my approach was always like, I want it to be the case that if those spooks that have, that wish to undermine what's happening here are listening to me, are interacting with me in some way, I have an aspiration to make what I'm saying and basically the person that I'm trying to be sufficient to cause them to, at a minimum, rethink the side that they're on. Be like,
exactly,
like, well, this doesn't sound so bad, and these people don't seem like such bad people, and they seem to be talking about things that are broadly good. Like, should I really be, against these people? Should I be trying to undermine them? Should I be trying to stop them? And that's my approach. And the beauty of that approach is that it's a valid approach, and perhaps one of the most valid approaches, whether or not you're interfacing with a spook or someone who's aligned with you and all that kind of stuff. Like, it works both ways. So why not, it gives that approach, I guess, more validity in my mind, because it works on everyone. And if there are people out there that, are ostensibly against you, then again, step one, you're as impervious to attack as possible, but also you're giving them reason to question their own motivations and their own perspective, and possibly bring them to the other side. And for those people that you're aligned with, you're both just enjoying that degree of alignment, you know, how much you line up on so many things, and it's evident that you're both attempting to be an embodiment of those values. And again, what's better than interacting with people who are doing that, because it's a very humble and, well, just wonderful, you know, a way of interacting with people.
Yeah, I think it's basically combining the feminine aspect of being loving, while at the same time the masculine principle of self-defense.
Yeah, that's
kind of
an interesting, you know, I think that's a good way of putting it. You know, and the one of the things I will say, and I don't know if this is a guilty pleasure or if there's some greater virtue in it. I mean, my broader faith, if you want to call it that, is if Bitcoin is what we think it is, it doesn't really matter how people end up expressing it and, you know, defending it or not. Like it's going to work itself out in the end. And you know, my personal approach is the one I just articulated. So I'm not very much like, I don't see much value for me in screeching about every little thing that I'm frustrated about. Like, you know, I'll scroll Twitter and I'll see all the bullshit and I'll want to say the same things that everyone else is saying. It doesn't seem to me to be the best approach for doing what I can to affect the change that I want to see. So I take a different track, but that's just a preface to me saying, I do appreciate those who take another approach, because, you know, I'm sure many of us have been in situations like kind of, this is the wrong characterization, but like wealthy, fancy, you know, upper class sort of, whether it's parties or events or circles or dinners, or like we've been around those sorts of environments. And I'm not condemning all those people, but one of the hallmarks seems to be is like those people don't crap where they eat, basically. You know, so you might be in the environment of someone who you kind of think is engaging in like immoral activity, let's say, or even illegal activity. I mean, there's many examples of this, whether we want to do it on, you know, Wall Street or in politics or whatever. Like there's people that are deserving of criticism at a minimum, and it doesn't happen because nobody wants to ruffle the feathers. Everyone just wants to go along to get along, and everyone's kind of doing, you know, things that maybe they don't want to be brought to light. So everyone just kind of acts like everything's cool on the surface, right? You're in your tux, you're drinking champagne, and everything's kosher. And what I like about Bitcoiners is because they're so independent, because they have such a reverence for truth, because the more of their wealth they have in Bitcoin, the more impervious it is to the consequences of ruffling feathers. They more and more, I think, feel emboldened to say, hey, scammer, fuck you. You're being dishonest and you're scamming people and it's not right. And they're not saying like they're going to do anything about it, nor are they saying, you know, nor are they trying to sick enforcement on those people. They're just saying you're doing something wrong. And because because I'm independent and I'm sovereign and I'm sticking to certain principles here, I'm going to call it out just so that it's there, just so other people can be aware, or just so the conversation can happen publicly. Because otherwise, this whole fiat system has created this culture where if you're wealthy and powerful, people, it's not just that like the system protects you, it's that people are afraid to contend with you. People are afraid to point out the areas where you're doing things that are immoral or illegal. And therefore it just perpetuates, and it doesn't get the scrutiny that it otherwise deserves. And so I love that, you know, there's this ragtag cohort of cyber hornet, whatever you want to call them, that's going to just be like, hey, scammer, like dishonest, lack of integrity, bullshit scammer, you're a scammer, and I'm pointing the finger at you. And that's all they're doing. And then the rest of us can look at it and assess it for ourselves. Do we think those people are scammers? Do we think they're immoral? Do I want to be associated with them? Do I want to do business with them? Do I want to be a customer? Do I want to, you know, add my voice to the chorus? And I don't know. I appreciate it because I think it's good that there's less tolerance for, again, broadly speaking, immoral behavior in the Bitcoin, you know, in a Bitcoin world than there has been in the fiat world, and which has, as a result, contributed to so many of the things that we'd probably criticize about the fiat world. There's this culture of silence if you're wealthy and powerful, basically.
Yeah, I think absolutely, it's absolutely necessary, this mechanism of calling out. It's the mechanism of setting boundaries. And what as you just said, that I feel like what one could add, because if you end it there, if you just say, "Hey, scammer,
Fuck you.
fuck you," or even if you're just calling it out nicely and like not or at least not
Nicely.
too.
I would like to label you a scammer, sir.
Exactly. So if you stop there, then okay, now what? But what I think what we could add, and this is what how you can fix relationships, is you can call out the boundary and then say, you know what, let's find a way together. This is bullshit, but let's find a way. So in terms of scammers, one could say, hey, fuck you, scammer, but I know you need help, so I can help you. Let's become friends, and I can show you the right way, kind of. And this is basically what healthy relationships look like. Of course, maybe if someone is actually scamming you, that's maybe a bit too much of a boundary breach, but all kinds of boundary conflicts, if we just say, hey, you crossed my boundary, stop, then it's like, okay, and now what? But usually there needs to be a step afterwards that makes consolidates, or that brings both people closer together, or closer in an alignment where the boundaries are not getting crossed, and where even out of a win-lose situation or lose-lose situation, there becomes a win-win-win situation. So this stop and let's find a way. I think that this is this could be an important step.
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually, as you're saying that, I mean, what comes to mind is like that is actually the unifying power of Bitcoin itself, because you're saying like, you know, stop, you're a scammer, this is a boundary. But if you enter into this world, if you accept Satoshi as your Lord and Savior, if you you welcome Bitcoin if you enter the Bitcoin system, well, then I'll know that you can't be scamming, right? You can't scam me if you're in this system. And so, you know, that's the next step. So, you know, you call it the scammer, and then you know, maybe it's stay humble, stack sats, or maybe that's the playful insinuation of have fun staying poor. You know, it's saying that if you exist outside of this system, well, you know, well, how are people going to trust you, first of all, if you've already been a scammer, you know? But if you enter into a system where you can't scam people, you know, at least without their partial involvement, then, you know, you don't have to trust people. That's kind of the whole point. Not to say that trust won't be a component in the future. It absolutely will, but I think it'll manifest in different ways, and it'll be used in different ways. But and of course, you know, all those people saying that, it's like people may not have the time to participate in cultivating or what's the word, rehabilitating certain people, or establishing certain relationships. So I think, you know, a lot of people's approach is just to call it out and then basically suggest, you know, come into this system where, you know, your deeds can be partially redeemed, because one, they can't take place here, you know, again, if people are approaching all this in the most optimal way. And maybe, you know, as a result of that, your trust can begin to be rebuilt. You know, you can slowly over the course of time show yourself to be redeemed in some way.
Yeah, I think maybe the scammer is not the best example, because it's so there's so much energetic load towards those scammers. It's such a unpopular group of people to us Bitcoiners. But the same dynamic, I would say, is basically in every orange pilling approach, because once someone tells us about their, I don't know, about how they got scammed in with FTX or whatever, and they are holding onto their opinion that the fiat system is still good, and you're suggesting the opposite. It's kind of like it's the same dynamic as if you were battling a scammer, because they are in the scammer paradigm.
Right.
So even though it's not the best example, and I wouldn't suggest, hey, let's start orange pilling the scammers, because that's the least effective group to make friends.
Right.
But we can start with our friends. We can start with those who are still in the scammer paradigm, and use basically the same mechanism of setting boundaries, but also inviting and also opening up. And I think if we focus on the inviting and the loving part more, we get it into a perfect balance. Because right now it's more of the rational. Here is all the information about Bitcoin, and this is kind of the opposing. And we need the emotional part as well. We need the emotional part at least in the same extent, to have it balanced and be flowing with the flow of the universe, to say it like this.
Yeah. Well, this is, I agree, but I also kind of default to my prior statement where it's like, why is it that so many people are currently inspired to express this in a certain way? And, the answer is probably, it's being filtered through their own personalities and their own experiences and their own perception of the state of the world. And so we're getting a variety of different expressions. And who am I to say it's not the variety that we currently need for the current time, because it's what we have. But personally, like I guess my own opinion on it, if I was to have, a less Zen-like approach to it and just kind of say, what would I want to see? I totally agree. I mean, this is part of the reason why I love seeing artists pop up in the space, visual artists, videos, rappers, like memes, whatever. Like, because as you're saying, that stuff hits people on an emotional level. Most people don't want to talk about the macroeconomic landscape and the history of money and that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just way off people's radars. But you put a very emotive video in front of them, or a very humorous video in front of them that covers some of those themes, and that's way more appealing to way more people. And then the other element of that, and I think I hear a lot of people saying this lately, which is great, because I think it's profoundly true. But most of us want the same things in life, right? You want security, you want comfort, you want love, you want belonging, you want meaning, you want value, you want flourishing, you want family, you want health. And so whenever you see those things, your attention, thing perks up. And then you look at those things and you say, oh, like how did they achieve those things? This is kind of why the allure of celebrity even exists, right? Because you look at these people and you think, I mean, kind of the conceit of celebrity is they put forward one image and the reality is something very different. But suffice it to say that your mind looks at them and you say, oh, wow, they have all the things that I want. They have, success and wealth and fame and, beauty and all these sorts of things. And therefore, that's why they're a spokesperson for people, because people are so looking at them and saying, they have what I want. What are they using to get there? I should use the same thing, or I should think the same way, or I should whatever. And so I think, if we're really right about Bitcoin, and if we're truly convicted in its truth, let's say, then I think the most effective approach, and again, this ticks both the boxes of ticking your own box for your own personal benefit and ticking the boxes for, bringing more people into this thing, is just use it, leverage its benefit as to the maximum, for your own life, and use it as a tool for your own refinement, and then allow the degree to which it elicits or produces a benefit in your life, in your relationships, in your work, in your health, in your satisfaction, all those kind of things. Allow that to just be a signal for other people looking for the same thing to pick up on. And then they'll ask themselves that, either they'll ask themselves, what is that person doing? Or they'll ask you, what are you doing? And you won't have to go around with the fire hose, and the orange pills and trying to shove them down people's throats, because the way that human psychology works is they'll come to you, whether it's come to your YouTube channel or come to your podcast or come to you in actual meet space, because the thing that you're using to cultivate what you deem to be an optimized life will be equally attractive to them, because you're probably both seeking, the same things. And so again, that's why I say, I mean, it's an expression of deep conviction, because if you really believe that Bitcoin produces that, if you really believe that Bitcoin is what we often talk about it is, and it is more, that more so than anything, then you will recognize the primacy of that approach in simply being a representation of the benefit that it of its potential benefit, and then allowing that to be the strongest case to make to everyone out, outside of yourself, basically.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And one of the things that everybody wants is relationships. And I think that if we focus on relationships, on building so of course we should focus on all the other amazing growth and expansions that Bitcoin brings to all our other areas of life. We should definitely do that as well. However, I think, or what I want to present, and that's the main topic why I contacted you, is because I want to share a method that you can that has many parallels to Bitcoin, that you can use to expand your relationships, and in turn be a lighthouse to the fiat world, to the people seeing, oh wow, these Bitcoiners, they also have the most amazing relationships, and not only do they have the most amazing relationships between themselves, but they are also loving towards other people, if they so please. Of course, there is not. I don't want to force or force any Bitcoiner to now go out and
follow your approach.
Exactly. What I want to do is just inspire. Hey, I totally understand that it's very hard to have the same joy as you have connecting to Bitcoiners while trying to connect to pre-coiners.
Right. But
at the same time, I can show you a way that you can make connecting to quote unquote pre-coiners also a very deeply fulfilling experience, by going to the human level, by going to the emotional level, just as an option that I want to share, because this is, in my experience, this has opened up the relationships in my surrounding, where instead of me trying to convince my surroundings, when I started to focus on deepening the emotional relationship, the emotional trust with my environment, with my relationships, suddenly people started to ask me, and to proactively ask me about Bitcoin. And that was because in the way that I related to them emotionally, the way that I made myself vulnerable, I showed myself as who I am. It's not, you can't, it's just so obvious that Bitcoin has deeply touched my soul. So when I make myself vulnerable in front of others, I don't have to talk to them about Bitcoin or convince them about it. They just see the emotional meaning for it within me. Right. And by relating to them, which doesn't, like, even if you're not relating, even if in the emotional relating, the word Bitcoin never comes up, they still feel a difference, and they are drawn to you because you are different emotionally. Mm-hmm. And I just love that it's deeply fulfilling to connect with people in general, with with the approaches that I learned, and at the same time, it propels kind of passively Bitcoin adoption.
Yeah, well, after a 90-minute preamble, you putting forward that approach, why don't you hit me with it?
Yes. So maybe a quick context. The method is open source. So the guy who developed that, he just said, you know what? People love it. I see that this is in his opinion this will be a game changer for the quote unquote global awakening. And you know what? I won't license it to make people so people don't have to attain a license to further use it with others. So you can do whatever the F you want with it. You can use it. You can even make money with it. I don't care. This is one aspect. So it's open source. And the other aspect is it's peer-to-peer. And realizing that this parallel to Bitcoin was like, how is it possible that this emerges right in these important times? I think it emerged 2021 around that time. And how is it peer-to-peer? So usually therapy is not on a really eye level relationship. It's the therapist who's guiding, or kind of depending on the therapy form. He's the one in the position of power, let's say, and the client is the one who's asking for the service, let's say. And what the approach that I want to share, which is called honest sharing, by the way, what this enables is it's very easy to use, and you can use it with friends. And the whole process is a short silence, person A is sharing, a short silence, person B is sharing, short silence, done. The sharing of each side is about 5 to 10 minutes. And what this does is that both people who are sharing their inner perceptions, I go a bit into detail about that in a moment. If both are sharing, there is no disbalance in power. It's both people are opening up and making themselves vulnerable in front of each other. And not only that, but also both people are having the opportunity to process their emotions. And what we see in therapists nowadays, in the Fiat therapists, just as a funny side note, is most of them don't go to therapy themselves, and they could use the chance of having their own emotions processed as well during their work, but they're not, because they're always in the position of power and not making themselves vulnerable.
You know, and if I could just interrupt for a sec, I think that's part of it, because I know some therapists, and I know that some of them do have like that's part of their schedule, you know, someone to be their therapist so they can kind of unwind and dump out a lot of the stuff that has been imposed upon them, but or they've participated in, let's say. But the other thing is an interesting point that you made there about, you know, a Fiat therapist, let's say. And again, I know therapists. I have a lot of respect for them, you know, and most of the ones I know are extremely well intended and very compassionate and all that kind of stuff. But it, you know, I think part of the effort of therapy, or let's say maybe one of the ultimate or loftier efforts, because, you know, you may just be trying to, you know, resolve an acute issue very quickly, and so that's very specific. But I think broadly, you know, the role is to try to help people become more integrated with like all aspects of themselves, and then all aspects of the broader environment that they exist within, not just the physical and natural, but again, like the the metaphysical. I mean, what are you becoming integrated with, if not, those kind of unspeakable domains that help us, that are inextricable part of our consciousness and our life, let's say. And if they, to the extent that their own development has been fostered by a signal, or by a system where they're getting false signals and corrupt incentives and poor feedback and artificial deprivation and artificial accolade, like all of those things are going to dramatically fragment their own perception and their own integrity. And I don't mean integrity in the sense that it's commonly used, being honest and forthcoming, but I mean integrity like with the ground of being, let's say, like, properly oriented as a conscious human being. That, being so integrated into a system like that is going to dramatically inhibit their ability to provide that to the people they're trying to help. And so I guess that's just a comment on, as well intended as so many care providers are around the world today, they're being dramatically, I would say, impeded or inhibited simply by the system that they operate within, both mechanically in terms of what the system is able to provide, but also psychologically, philosophically, or spiritually in terms of what they're not getting from the system, and therefore what they're not able to help foster in the people that they're trying to help. And I very much look forward to a Bitcoin, a hyper Bitcoinized world where all of that is reversed. And as very much in line with the conversation we've been having today, hopefully we will exist within a society or a system that is far more conducive to that type of integration that I was alluding to.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to publicly apologize to all quote unquote Fiat therapists. The way I said it before was a bit sarcastic, and it was just an expression of my pain going through that system. And so I want to apologize and want to say that I see the best intentions in you, and it's not the therapist themselves, it's the system. I just wanted to say that. And yes, to me today I did a session of honest sharing with a friend of mine, a fellow Bitcoiner, and during the session I had the insight, like, how can anyone who is not a Bitcoiner truly say they are confident? They must be suppressing something. They must be lying to themselves at some level.
Why do you say that? Because they're so vulnerable in certain aspects of their life? Or what do you mean?
I would say mainly because human nature is to wanting to live in a cooperative, harmonious world. And to go around in this world and say, I'm confident, I'm happy, but at the same time seeing whatever is going on, and not at the same time
I see,
being part of the solution, being consciously part of the solution. How can you be truly confident? Because it's kind of a disconnect to nature. That's kind of trying to summarize what you were saying about the therapist as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it comes back to that point about being truly integrated. And I think that's the power of the correct or the most truthful orienting idea or philosophy or notion or concept, let's say, in that it permits you to maintain, it permits you to optimally maintain integrity despite the conditions or specifics of your experience. And so as you say, a lot of people walk around the world today and they appear outwardly quite confident, but how true is that confidence? How much could that confidence hold up to changing circumstances? And I think it's part of the definition, or one of the hallmarks, or it's fundamental to this idea of profound truth, that it's the thing that fosters the greatest integrity, right? It's the thing that fosters the greatest unity. And, of course,
Mhm.
religions have called this notion God, and there's been, many other labels or ways of conceptualizing it. But I think that's the thing. And if you have a genuine, well, not even relationship to that, but if it really is kind of the degree to which that is brought into your own consciousness, the degree to which you're integrated with that, I think that is what enables you to bear the burden of the broadest set of circumstances that might befall you in life. And
Mhm.
and of course, kind of conversely, I think the broadest set of, or the worst burdens in life that people are exposed to, the worst tragedies, the worst, circumstances of various kinds, can also lead you to that thing that promotes the
Mhm.
greatest integrity, because it's in those moments that you need it most, where you're most disintegrated, where everything like
Mhm.
that facade or that illusion that you had built up to move through the world, it's you're you're coming to realize that it's insufficient to see you through the pain or the weight or the burden of the moment that you're facing, and so like what I'm referring to here is like crisis moments, breakdowns,
Mhm.
prison camp survivors, people in the worst imaginable, or not even the worst imaginable because it's very subjective, but when you have that kind of breakdown, it's when you realize that the thing that you've been integrated with, or your notion, or the thing that most orients you in the world so that you can move through it, your own conception of yourself, right, your own identity, your own ego, you come face to face with that moment where you say, oh, it's insufficient, like it's not
Mhm.
capable of meeting this moment without completely destroying me, without completely disintegrating me. And of course, you can respond two ways to those moments. You can allow it to fully destroy you, and that leads to all manner of bad outcomes, or you can allow the kind of intensity of that moment to give you an added capability of finding something that is more integrated, that is more capable of assisting you in uh, confronting whatever it is you're confronting, and maintaining integration, and maintaining yourself, let's say. And yeah, I think I can't remember what kicked off that thought, but I think that's kind of what you're getting at with the confidence thing. It's like,
Mhm.
the confidence can either be real via, a true integration like that, or it can be, drummed up. It can be somewhat artificial and not really tethered to too much stuff, because as you say, like, how could it be, how could one exude that type of confidence within the circumstance or system that they're nestled within. But I
Mhm.
think that it's really easy to front, in day-to-day life, at your work, at your job, or whatever. You can put on an artificial mask, you can put on a brave face. But I think this is why we see so many diseases of despair today, why we see so much
Mhm.
substance abuse, why we see so much overeating, overwatching, overconsuming, like all these different mechanisms by which people, cover up or ignore the true nature of their feeling about things.
Mhm.
And so, and almost the anguish of having to put on a happy face, a confident face in all the different environments of their life,
Mhm.
and so when they withdraw from those places where when they withdraw to those places where nobody's watching, then then the real comes out, and the real is like, oh, just, you find all these methods of assuaging the anguish of having to operate like that. And then, of
Mhm.
course, in the more intense moments, that glass confidence often breaks. And I think this is why there's such an interest in pursuing personal development and pursuing those spiritual paths, because there's a
Mhm.
recognition that that is the way you find the truth about yourself, and perhaps even a broader truth. And that is what permits you to be the most resilient, the most integrated, the most capable of embodying the appropriate virtues or consciousness for any given moment, to see yourself optimally through life. And obviously, in our context here, we're exploring and discussing and sharing our own experiences about how Bitcoin has been, a tremendous tool in that process, if not the greatest tool,
Mhm.
which, as I often discuss on this show, is quite the assertion or realization to make. But, time and time again, as I talk to so many people out there, just regular, so-called regular people, it would seem that there's a lot of proof in the pudding, let's say.
Yes, exactly. And Bitcoin will enable more and more resources and like, yeah, let's just put it as resources to pursue emotional development.
Right.
Because it sets the time free, it sets the energy free.
Yeah.
And so maybe coming back to honest sharing, to the protocol that I want to inspire the community to experiment with, maybe even iterate on. It's peer-to-peer nature that you basically, that there is no one in power, or at the same time both people are in power, everyone who is participating. With this setup, emotional growth is now even independent from paid psychologists. So not only do we don't even have to wait until Bitcoin will set more and more of our time and money free to be able to go to spend it towards our emotional growth. Now what we can do is, as long as we have friends, or as long as we are willing to make friends to do this with, and there are tons of people who want to spend their time doing these kind of activities, as long as we're willing to do that, now we are independent even from needing the financial resources for right. therapists, etc. And I think this is one massive part of why this probably why this could play a massive role. And so the basic, I think it doesn't make sense to go into the full instruction, because it's the full instruction takes about 20 minutes to read. I have it.
We can direct people or to your piece of writing, I think, on it, right?
Exactly. I have a short one and I have a long one. Please copy it and post it somewhere else on the internet. You don't even have to put my name on it. Just make sure that it doesn't get deleted. So I put together an English translation of the method that you can then probably find in the show notes. But I would say I give you a basic overview, because I can relate it back then, the mechanisms back to the to quote unquote Bitcoin adoption, quote unquote waking up to Bitcoin, quote unquote detaching from the abusive relationship to the government. Sure. So instead of I think before going into the mechanisms, I might do 1 or 2 minutes of just demonstrating how the method works, so we know like what is he even talking about.
Okay.
If that's fine. Okay, so I'll set a timer real quick. All right. Okay. Yeah, I feel excitement. I sense nervous energy all throughout my body. I sense a bit of relaxation. I feel a bit of sadness. My head thinks the amount of suffering out in the world is just, it feels like an endless, it seems like an endless sea of suffering. And my head thinks that this is letting me tap into sadness at any point in time. My head thinks, oh, come on, don't be overly dramatic. My head thinks, well, it's Bitcoiners who are listening, so they know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I feel pain. I feel like sadness, pain about the state of the world. My head thinks this pain is about the state of the world, and I feel gratitude. My head thinks, "Wow, what an amazing conversation so far." I sense how there are a lot of thoughts spinning, and it's like, oh, my head thinks, "Wow, it's been kind of a trip for me." This conversation. I feel a tiny bit of insecurity around my chest. And I feel a bit of pride. My head thinks, oh, be careful, not too much pride. That's, or you will be seen as arrogant. My head thinks, oh, well, there's so much fiat still inside of all of us, and I'm looking forward to dissolving it. Thank you for listening. So this is how a round of honest sharing can look like.
So I think you said before you would do it for 5 minutes, not 2 minutes, right? Or does it matter?
Well, it depends how much time you have.
Okay. So so there's one person A does that, and then you say there's an equivalent period of silence before person B goes ahead.
Yeah, it's just you give each other short. It can be a few breaths. You can take even 5 minutes, whatever you feel like. Just some silence, so you don't. So you kind of complete your sharing, and then the other can start from kind of a new space or a fresher space.
You know, one of the things that comes to mind when you're doing that is there's always so many thoughts going through my mind. It's like my mind, if I was tasked with doing what you just did, I think part of me would be conflicted, like, well, how do I which thought do I choose? You know, they're going so fast, and so there's so many of them, like, because it's almost like I hate to use a oft misused sort of hippie or woo woo term, but it's almost like somewhat of a quantum relationship, right? Like the thought isn't real. It's not fully expressed within me. It doesn't fully conjure up the imagery until let's say it's like a rapidly moving river with all sorts of fish, right? And it doesn't, like, the one I pluck out becomes the one that I focus on, but it's almost like there's so many that it could be at any given moment that, and so maybe that's part of the benefit of the exercise. It's almost more than anything, it's like, sure, out of the near infinite soup of potential thoughts, why is it you end up picking the ones that you pick out, and maybe that's what's most instructive.
Interesting perspective. I would actually say my experience is that no matter which thought you pick, it doesn't matter, because the thoughts that want to be expressed, that want to be known, they will stay in the pool anyway until you pick them out. So it's the model that this is viewing the psyche through is not necessarily like, okay, there's infinite randomness and I can just pick from the randomness inside of me, but there's a whole, let's say, family of inner parts of mine who all want to be like inner child parts, who want to be acknowledged, who want to be heard, who want to be seen, who want to be understood. And the process of emotional development is pulling these parts out of the shadow, out of the sea, out of this pool, and finally listen to them and getting the information that they are desperately trying to tell you for all the time. So once you do that, they don't their force of wanting to crush through the surface and scream at you or tell you or face you with whatever emotion or memory or thought, their desire to do that. Exactly. The energy is just transmuted from all this. Oh, please listen to me. I experienced all this pain back then. To now I'm safe. Now Benny is or John is an adult, is grown up, and his nervous system is strong, and he knows how to be connected to his empathetic side, to his compassionate side. It's this compassion, the self-compassion that we have to show each of these thoughts, each of these parts, each of these emotions that are bubbling below the surface, to help them calm down. Because then it's like, oh yeah, okay, we're not in the situation from back then anymore. And also I could tell him what I wanted to tell him, and now he is a more integrated, a more whole being, because he knows this perspective of experience, because I was able to tell it to him. So
I think it's also probably useful in terms of, it seems to me to be the case that many people people have many fears, but one of them is of themselves, and so oftentimes people are afraid to really look at the, proverbial or metaphorical mirror, look themselves in the mirror. And, this is back to I think a lot of spiritual pursuits kind of confront you with that and force you to confront yourself. I found that the psychedelics to be extremely powerful in that way, because it really, like, even the things that you're not actively avoiding about yourself, and you probably are actively avoiding a number of things, or things that you try not to think about yourself, but even the ones that you're not aware of, or that are latent, or that are, suppressed in some way, those get conjured up. And it's all just, you can't proceed, right? There's no pass go, or you shall not pass to the other aspects of the experience until you contend with those. And it can be extremely challenging, but also extremely therapeutic. And this seems like another method of, at a minimum, just recognizing aspects of yourself, i.e. thoughts that you're having, and then, disarming them to a certain degree, at least enough to begin the process of contending with them, rather than keeping them suppressed and allowing them to exert an unconscious influence.
Exactly. And by choose, and the good thing is that you still have the choice of which parts to pick,
right?
Unless you're like flooded at the moment because you experienced something tragic or highly triggering for you. But you still have the choice to say, you know what, I know there's some parts that need my attention, but I don't feel like I have the capacity today. I look at some other parts, and this way, these parts that need my attention, they notice, okay, he's taking care of us. Maybe not us today, but he is intending to help all of us, because he's doing it over and over, and he's also demonstrating that he is capable of helping the other parts. So these parts are also calming down, because they notice, oh wow, there's this giant ball of love, and we are getting closer and closer to it.
Yeah, I can see that. No disrespect by phrasing that, by asking this question, but what about this protocol is, you said it was developed in 2021. What's kind of particularly novel or unique about it? Because, I think anyone listening might just be like, yeah, you sit down, you share your thoughts with a friend, and that's it. It's probably been happening for a long ass time. So what is kind of unique about this? And a little bit more about kind of how you've been using it and what some of the results have been would be interesting as well.
That's the perfect question to kind of get into the main principles below it, because it is very similar to just speaking a mindfulness meditation out loud. mindfulness meditation, you in some variants you label it, you say thought, feeling, sensation, thought, sensation. This is a known mindfulness meditation for decades or centuries probably. However, doing it with someone else allows you to notice that you are safe with others, showing your most vulnerable sides. So it shows you that even though maybe you are sharing dark secrets or parts of dark secrets, you're still not getting shamed or blamed, or it doesn't interrupt the relationship. It even deepens it, because you notice, oh wow, the other person can relate to it. I'm not alone with these secrets or with these feelings. And this is actually what we would have needed from our parents to avoid the attachment trauma. And another example is not just the content itself of what you're sharing, but the act of sharing. For example, let's say sharing a feeling of helplessness. Could you go to your parents and share that you're feeling helpless? Depending on the relationship, maybe, but most people couldn't. Most people would say, "Whoa, no, I'm not feeling safe sharing with my parents how vulnerable I feel, how not stable I sometimes feel." Why is that for many people? Because they noticed that when they were young, the parents were triggered themselves while they were triggered as a child, and they were seeing like, oh well, my parents can't even deal with their own emotions, and they can't deal with my emotions, so I am bad for overwhelming my parents with my emotions. This is just one example, and bringing in this relational aspect is just, yeah, it's pretty much. I don't want to get too comparative to Bitcoin, but Bitcoin only added the difficulty adjustment, right? It just added one aspect and everything clicked. But doing it together, and I think one part as well is just the speaking of it. Speaking out is like training to set boundaries. It's like speaking up. You're exercising to speak up, and this gets you more and more in contact. Finally, you at some point you will realize, wow, I can even communicate my anger.
So it's kind of it kind of has that aspect of vulnerability or receptivity, where you're saying, like, you're kind of putting at least some of your cards on the table, things that you wouldn't normally articulate or express, but also has kind of the yang element, the outward element, where you're simultaneously almost you're being more courageous than you typically are, because you are expressing these things and giving voice to things that you otherwise mightn't share. So you're kind of maybe doing both simultaneously. And because one of the things that I was thinking, and I think a lot of people would think as well, is like, we all know, well, we referred to kind of like the overly woo-woo hippies before, right? And one way you might characterize, and we probably shouldn't broad brushstroke characterize those people because they're all different, but let's do it for the sake of argument and say you could probably get away with saying oftentimes those types of people are a little bit too receptive, a little bit too open, a little bit too allowing of everything to take place, and maybe not, maybe the yang element of things is not as well represented. And that's even in my own stuff, like I explore, experience, trial a lot of those uh more open sort of things. I think psychedelics, broadly speaking, is probably one of them, because it just kind of shatters your ego, if only temporarily, and you're extremely receptive, both consciously and perhaps in whatever group you're with. But I like to pair them with like really hardcore physical challenges, if for no other reason, not necessarily to even get a habit started, or not even necessarily to effectuate some physiological change, but just to ground you in that kind of energy, in toughness and grit, in the what you were alluding to earlier, like the aggressive sort of element, the yang element to the receptivity is yin. Because I guess the reason why the sign has both in equal portions is because that's you need to find the optimal balance, and if you too much in either direction is probably suboptimal.
The market equilibrium.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes. One kind of teaser. You said the ego gets shattered. This wording, in my experience, is still Fiat paradigm, because it comes from a spiritual school that is promoting the ego death. And in my experience, no, the ego doesn't have to die. It has to do a vacation, or it has to be reintegrated. It has to be repurposed. It has to find a way to be more helpful. But the ego is not your enemy. The ego is your best friend. Totally. And I think my thesis is that this whole kill your ego propaganda, maybe I'm a bit overboard with that, but it would definitely fit the speech patterns of someone who would want to suppress other people by telling them their ego is bad.
Yeah, well, I totally agree, which is why I said if only temporarily.
Yes. Yes.
Because I think the whole, and a lot of Bitcoiners have been discussed. I don't know why ego death has been interpreted by so many lately, or just generally, as being a permanent thing. For when I have referred to it and experienced it in the past, it was always a temporary thing. So you go into an experience that basically breaks you down, shatters your ego, and as a result of that, you're able to experience a more unified, a less differentiated form of consciousness, in my opinion. But and there's that's an ineffable experience. And then when you depart from that state of consciousness, then the work of recapitulating your ego is what takes place. And this is often called integration after these experiences or whatever. And that's when you say, okay, again, as you said, the ego's not bad. It's necessary, and it can be the most. Well, you can't escape it, so you might as well like it's the fundamental tool of who you are as an individual. And so how should it be constituted? How should it be constructed? And so that's the, then this is the kind of the metaphor and the recurring mythological imagery of the phoenix. The phoenix doesn't just die and then he's dead. He dies, and then rising from the ashes, rising from, the parts of it that, are no longer serving him, no longer required, whatever, it emerges renewed once again in a form that's more, more capable, more fitted to its environment, more fitted to its goals or ambitions or what have you. And that's always been my approach. And so it's suspending or shattering the ego temporarily so you can gain access to a particular state of consciousness, but then coming back down, and with the wisdom of that state of consciousness, saying, in what ways should I imbue that wisdom into my quote unquote ego, such that it's a better tool moving forward. It's a better tool to operate with. Certainly not, insinuating that that it goes away, because that's just an absurd notion on its face, and you want to be careful of anyone espousing that kind of so-called wisdom.
Yes, that's Fiat spirituality, in my opinion. Well, I think it's helpful to just finish up the method by
sure.
I think anyone who listened and so far will have decided if if it's interesting for them or not. So I won't go too much into detail. Just to round up the point, what makes it different. What is very important is to use these phrases that I always started the sentences with. Right? Like I always said, my head thinks,
Right.
I feel, I sense. This is very important because we are not in a state on a level of consciousness yet as humans where we can live without these, or where we can stay with ourselves and in the here and now, focused while sharing with others without using these tools as helpers. I don't know the word right now, but you know, and by saying my head thinks, I feel, I sense, it's very obvious that it's just your feelings, and this helps to disentangle the two people who are sharing with each other to each other, disentangle them from each other. Because what happens in a child to parents relationship, when parents share their emotions to the child, or when parents just talk how they are and talk about stuff, they don't make clear that these are their emotions. It's just a giant emotion that blasts right into the nervous system of the child, and the child can't differentiate, is it my emotion, or is it the emotion of the parent? And this, it's kind of a disentanglement by always making sure it's my emotion, and that's your emotion, and this is my emotion. And it's just mind-blowing how this can, like, this is one of the most potent lever to fix or to heal relationships. It's usually when these boundaries aren't clear, where relationship conflict arises as well. And by saying these phrases, my head thinks, it's very, for example, it's very obvious that you are not the thought, but you are the one observing the thought. So this whole observing, go meditate and just observe your thoughts. Okay, but how? If you use a phrase like that, it becomes enormously easy. It's a bit of training. It's not, okay, let's say it's simple, not easy, but it becomes way easier than doing it without. So it's just an amazing tool to bring all these ancient wisdoms into practical, for nowadays, fitting practical concrete action steps that we can take.
Yeah.
There are more benefits and stuff about that, but that should be enough as kind of a, I would say, general idea for anyone who's interested to look further.
I think for a lot of people, even that shift in perspective, that to not fully identify with one's own thoughts can be very helpful and powerful. I laugh at myself sometimes because, like, I'll observe a thought and I'll be like, wow, that is fucking horrible. I'm glad that's not me. I'm glad I'm just the one observing that, and I'm not fully responsible for that thought because it was bad. Because if you did, if you did, whether it's identifying with all the good thoughts or all the bad thoughts or whatever, I mean, again, like the tornado of thoughts can be, well, it can be tornado-like, so it can be like a torrent. There can be so many of them, and then depending upon your environment, circumstance, food you ate, experiences you've had, they might tilt good, tilt bad, tilt horrible, tilt wonderful. And I think just that perspectival shift where people begin to create, and this is very Buddhist and been said for thousands of years, but when you can create that space and not fully identify with the thought, then I think it allows you a lot more leeway in properly regulating emotions and properly perceiving truth and properly in orienting yourself, more effectively toward truth and all the benefits that can be derived from that. And then, of course, in communication with others, it's incredibly beneficial as well, because you can both kind of sit there and know that you can share a thought, and where you otherwise might be extremely apprehensive of doing so, and still, to some degree probably are, because it still came from, within you, but you can both kind of just hold it in the space, and there's that, you're both holding a thought instead of being the thought, and that probably enables more genuine and more more genuine sharing and more introspection and more facilitation of closer connections, let's say.
And it enables holding multiple perspectives at the same time.
Right. And then it begs the question, like, well, I'm holding these 5 perspectives. Which one should I embody? And, I had a great conversation with John Vervaeke last year, and he introduced this notion to me, because we're talking about, kind of the wisdom of that ineffable space, that, that mystical experience, that no mind, that loving awareness, whatever you want to call it. And how do you determine right action from there? Because it seems like, there's something extremely true from there. But how do you distill that into day-to-day, moment-to-moment right action? And, it led into a discussion about virtues, right? And like, it would seem that virtues are kind of like conceptual distillations of the ineffable, aspects of the ineffable. And you could say, the virtue of honesty, or the virtue of fairness, the virtue of, love, or things like this. Like, those are elements of that thing that you're making explicit. And then it's like, well, which one? Like, which of those virtues should you most embody, depending on, the situation you're in? And I suggested to him, like, it seems to me to be fairly reasonable to say, to recognize you're not just one thing. Obviously, who you are and what you can be and what you should be is very context dependent. And so
it's decentralized.
So it seems to be the case, maybe, right action, and again, partial definition of right action is being capable of embodying the most appropriate virtue for the given situation or circumstance you're in, virtue or virtues. And he agreed with that. And he said, I think he said that's where we get the term, or that's basically what virtuosity means, being a virtuoso, and we, in common parlance, we understand that word of just being great at multiple things, right? But, apparently, or what he was suggesting is that's kind of what it means. It's being able to embody the most optimal virtue for the correct situation, and importantly, being able to move through them as and when are appropriate. And leading back to our discussion here, I don't think you have the capacity to do that, or at least a far diminished capacity, if you don't have that separation between awareness and thought, because they're too conjoined together to allow for frictionless movement. But if you have that space, and if you're kind of increasingly familiar with it, then you can be that maestro that can just determine which is best for the circumstance, and just move right into that and embody it to the fullest. And then when the circumstance changes, you move out of it and you can move into another one. And again, this is like kind of woo-woo talk, but I think it actually is. It seems to be true, and even if it's not fundamentally true, it seems to be an effective means of approaching the various circumstances that we inevitably confront.
It's what you described there is absolutely practical. Actually, it's like the internal family systems therapy model that I'm also trained in. Its whole its basic mechanism is blending and unblending from inner parts, and it's kind of mastered the let's say the inner joystick, the inner controller of this interface with reality. Right. So I can highly encourage you to look into, and anyone listening to look into that model as well, because that's exactly what you just described there. It put that into a very practical process that one can use, and you described it beautifully. I really enjoyed also virtuoso. Oh, amazing. Right.
Yeah, I loved it too, which is why it's stuck in my mind when he said it. So do we have any, did you want to share any more about, just how effective or your experiences with this before we close it out?
Yeah, I think a little bit about that makes sense. So I mentioned already that when I focus kind of more and more on that, for one, my focus went way back from trying to convince others, because it's more and more apparent that this is just my perception. My head thinks Bitcoin is true. But it also gives the other person the opportunity to, from their place, without any push, look at my sharing of my opinion about Bitcoin. Of course, I didn't like just to make this concept, just to illustrate the concept. Of course, I didn't try to orange pill anyone like with this method. But what I noticed is that the more I deepen my relationships with this method, and it can get so close, so deep. It's so intimate. It's unbelievable. If you share your deepest secrets with each other, it's I'm just in love with so many people right now, and like it's true love. It's and the more that happens, the more the others open up to you and to your perspective of the world. And then if Bitcoin is the truth, and it should be interesting for the others, then they will look into it by themselves. And what I experience is that I get asked more and more frequently. So it's I don't get asked because I don't do anything, but I get asked because I give them this. I proactively give them the space. It's not just giving them space by leaning back, but I proactively give others the space by expanding relationships. And the amazing thing about this is really, I think I said it before, but you start to not just connect deeply with Bitcoiners, but you begin to connect to the quote unquote pre-coiners again. And it's not this separation of we and them. It's like, oh my God, we're just humans, and it's just deeply fulfilling to have this pursuit that one could actively participate in, to know, oh my God, I could just go to spiritual events, I could go to entrepreneur events, I could go to maybe even to the church. Maybe I call it a bit different than what I do, but whatever. No matter where I find people who are open-minded about anything, I can just bring this connect with them. Exactly. Propose doing anything like that. Of course, even to these emotional processes. Of course, even to that, many people are very close because it seems dangerous to them. Mm-hmm. But in my experience, the amount of people that are open to these kinds of experiences are more than just Bitcoiners. So, sure. or more than just the people who are ready to quote unquote get orange pilled. So this is kind of a quote unquote population that we can contact, that we can embrace, and it's just I'm
imagining. So you do this with someone, and the connection grows, and I guess almost necessarily there's an alignment of perception happening, because you're like sharing thoughts in that way is kind of passing perception back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And maybe, you do it enough times over the course of, many sessions or whatever, perspectives begins to converge. And then, as you said, like if these people end up becoming interested, and I'm just being kind of playful here, but also kind of, potentially serious, but they get involved in Bitcoin as a result of this, right? And then you keep doing that, and at some point, like, you both get together and your perspective is so aligned, let's say, or converges on truth, that you both just sit there in silence. And that's like the apex experience, or like, that's the apex of this particular form of communing or communicating with one another. Like your consciousnesses are basically aligned, and you're just basking in the wisdom and joy of silence, or something like that.
And even the the experiences of quote unquote telepathy are number go up with this in my experience.
Well, I mean, at a certain point, how do you distinguish between telepathy versus having such a capacity for empathizing with the perspective of somebody else that you can predict their thoughts before they even have them, in a sense?
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. Yes,
a topic for another time, maybe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The only thing that I would say really is I want to encourage anyone listening who thinks, I have good enough relationships already. Seriously, of course, if you are already doing quote unquote deep talk, you're in further quote unquote as most people on the planet. However, you still have a Fiat reference point. Always remember, you have a reference point of Fiat relationships. So you don't know what is possible. You don't know how amazing relationships can be. And the great thing is, it's a gift that never keeps on giving. That always keeps on giving. That never loses on keeping on giving.
Right.
And even if none of those people who you connect deeply with understand Bitcoin at some point, it doesn't matter, because it's fulfilling on its own. It's just fulfilling to connect and enriching. And yeah.
Awesome.
That's what I want to say.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man, and having this, broad discussion and sharing your experiences with, this method and, the degree to which you think it can be beneficially, employed or used by others toward, one of the things that, my closing thoughts here, I guess, is I don't think I would have characterized myself as like overly self-serving, but I definitely, let's put it this way, as I've gone through life, I've appreciated relationships more and more, the value of sincere and genuine and loving relationships. And that's in relation to family members, and you can, again, better empathize with their sacrifices and where they're coming from, and all the dynamics that play there. But with everybody else as well. And for whatever reason, it really crystallized for me when I bought a motorhome in the Netherlands in 2018, and my extremely vague plan was to just drive around Europe. And when I find interesting people, I was going to set up like a studio in the motorhome, like with mics and stuff. And I was going to say, hey,
sounds great.
Come in the motorhome and we'll just talk. We'll talk about whatever you're into, whatever your thing is. And I mean, I kind of ended up doing a version of that. I mean, I ended up realizing that I was in all these amazing environments and backdrops. So why would you record in like a shitty old 1997 motorhome? So I ended up recording them in these beautiful environments when I had the opportunity to do so. But the reason why I bring up the story is because I was at actually a psychedelic conference in Prague. Can't remember what it was. Breaking. I can't remember what it was called. But anyway, it was one of the big psychedelic conferences, and Bill Richards was there, and he was the last of the group of early psychedelic researchers in the 50s, 60s, and 70s to continue the research, I think, at the University of Maryland. And they were the last one to get shut down in the early 70s. And then he and Roland Griffiths and another guy in 1999 got it going again at Johns Hopkins. And, since then there's been, quite the psychedelic renaissance. More research has been allowed, and the results of that research have been very promising. And this has helped to change perspectives on things and all that kind of stuff. But he was one of the speakers at the conference. And I had gotten in touch with him prior, and, via email. And like, I'm just a weird dude in a motorhome going to talk to people. Like, I'm not saying I have a podcast. I'm not saying I have credentials. So, naturally he was like, oh, I'm going to be busy throughout the conference, like I don't have time. And then at the conference, just by happenstance, he was sitting in the back of the room one day. And so I went up and sat next to him and said hi, and we briefly introduced myself. And then I said, basically, I'm that weird guy. And I had kind of cornered him, I suppose, but I convinced him to give me like an hour in the cafe,
Wow.
like just off from the conference. And so I set up everything, had him sit down, and we ended up having this lovely like 90-minute conversation. And he loosened up after 5 minutes when he realized that I'm not a psychopath, and reasonably informed and educated on the subject and all that kind of stuff. And anyways, we ended up developing a friendship. And so all throughout the rest of the conference, when he had a break, we'd go and get coffee and croissants at the cafe and sit down with his wife and just, had this lovely time. And I reflected to him, I was like, I felt throughout this trip thus far, I think it was half over at that point, like I wasted a lot of money on this, or it felt like a waste, because it was just a whim and it wasn't really productive in any sense. And I was like, but somehow, this relationship that we've developed, this friendship, somehow like that now supersedes all like the 20,000-30,000 bucks or whatever that I put into it. And it's kind of a weird thing to say, because he might be like, slow down, bro. Like we've only known each other for a couple of days, but he said the same thing back, so we, and again, it was that moment that made me realize, I guess, the value of, genuine, honest relationships, and how much I hadn't, that the value of them in my life, I hadn't been as conscious about them until that moment. Cause it struck me. I was like, cause I'm very financially conscious, and I, spending 20,000 or 25,000, whatever it is, bucks is like, it's not a small thing. Like it's something I'm going to be careful of. And it's almost like the process you use today, where I was just sitting there and like, I reflected, I heard my mind saying like, oh, it's all worthwhile now. And I was kind of struck by that thought. I was like, really? Like just because, you have a new friend, like all that money that you could have done those other things with has now been made worth it. And, and my, the thought that spit back is like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And, yeah, so I just reflecting on the truth of what you've been saying, and how valuable and powerful and worthwhile and representative of true wealth, genuine relationships can be.
Beautiful story. Well,
Benny, although I know that's not your real name, or at least I think it may not be, this has been awesome. And I appreciate you taking the time and being open and sharing in this way. You can send me the links to stuff afterwards, and I'll put it in the show notes. But otherwise, any final words, anywhere you want to direct people or anything like that before we shut it down?
No, just I can just encourage you to try it out, experiment with it, and contact me on Twitter if you have any questions about it. And I will probably post a lot more articles on this whole topic, on pretty much everything that we talked about in the coming time. So if you're interested in that, just follow the links.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, look, thanks again. Take care. And I look forward to connecting again sometime in the future.
Definitely. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, brother. See ya.
See ya.